On September 20th, 1991, 6 men making up the crew of the Andrea Gale fishing vessel set out from Gloucester Harbor, about 25 miles northeast of Boston. It was going out to fish, obviously, and then it was supposed to end up going into Newfoundland, but since the crew did not get a catch that they thought was adequate enough, they actually went further east in order to get more fish. And so they were out to sea for quite a while, over a month. October 26th comes along, the sea captain, the ship's captain, Captain Billy Tyne, decided that it was time to head home. They had caught the fish that they needed. Their cooler was actually broken, so they didn't have the means to keep it cool and keep it fresh. So they needed to get home. They needed to get home quickly, even though they had heard that there was bad weather on the way. The problem is that no one understood how bad that weather was going to be. You see, a cold front, I am not a meteorologist. I only pretend to be one on TV. But a cold front was coming down from the northeast. And it developed what was called an extratropical low-pressure system, a storm. Normally, that would have actually gone inland off of the coast. It would have actually gone inland, except at that moment, there is also, from the Appalachian Mountains, a ridge that basically formed a border so that it bounced off of the ridge back into the ocean. At just the right time, there had been a hurricane called Hurricane Grace coming up from the south that was slowing down, that ultimately got swallowed up by the extratropical low-pressure storm. The cold winds from the northeast and the warm water from the south because of the hurricane made an interesting storm, one that had not been seen for many, many years. In fact, they said that this storm only happens maybe once every 50 to 100 years. No way anyone on that ship had ever experienced a storm like this. The storm had produced waves from 30 to 60 feet high. And there was one buoy off the coast of Nova Scotia that recorded a record-breaking 100-foot wave. This is a terrible storm. Captain Billy's last contact was with a fellow fishing vessel, and he was reporting on the 30-foot waves and the high winds that were coming. And he was overheard on that radio saying his last known words: "She's coming on, boys, and she's coming on strong." The crew would never be seen again. The ship has never really been found. Pieces of it have been found. It is what is truly called the perfect storm. The origin of that saying, a perfect storm, is clearly meteorological in nature, but it has come to mean a situation in which a bunch of unexpected circumstances have occurred leading up to a detrimental or a calamitous situation. And I really believe that is exactly what has happened here with Peter when he has denied Christ this night that he was betrayed. When Peter denies Jesus, he is in the midst of the perfect storm, and she's coming on strong. And what I see are three earthly factors, three human factors. We all know, of course, God and God's providence and by God's will, this has happened. But I see that there are three human factors that have helped bring this about here at this moment, that produced this perfect storm. The first human factor that we see is that Peter was emotionally aching. Emotionally aching. The second, Peter was entirely alone. And lastly, Peter was effectively attacked. He was emotionally aching, he was entirely alone, and he was effectively attacked. That should say effectively attacked. I changed that. I don't know what happened, but go to effectively attacked. That's what it's going to be, all right? Don't write that one down if you're writing notes. So if you will, please stand with me. But he was as well enveloped in antagonation. It's all around him. All right. We're going to start at verse 54. Then they seized him and led him away, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light, and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied it, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, you also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will deny me 3 times." And he went out and wept bitterly. Thank you. You may be seated. So that first factor, humanly speaking, that first factor that led to Peter's denial is that he was, I believe, emotionally aching at this point. We go back to verse 54, and we see that they seized him. They seized Jesus and led him away, bringing him to the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. Now, for us to understand, let's put ourselves in Peter's place for just a minute. Peter had earlier pledged his loyalty to Jesus. He says, "Lord, I am ready to go with you to prison and to death." He has pledged his loyalty to Jesus. And just a few minutes before this ever happened, Peter actually had proven his loyalty to Jesus. We see that in just a couple of verses earlier where he says, "And one of them struck the servant of the high priest and cut off the ear." My dad would often say he wasn't aiming for the ear. He missed the head. He was trying to prove his loyalty to Jesus here. John tells us that it was actually Peter, of course, that did this. But in the midst of all of this, he has pledged his loyalty to Jesus, and when he pledges his loyalty to Jesus, Jesus says to him, we see in Matthew, "Get behind me, Satan." And then he proves his loyalty to Jesus, and Jesus says, "That's it, that's enough. No more of this." Both times, Peter's loyalty has been rebuffed by his own Messiah, rebuffed, reproven by his rabbi. If this was you, how would you be feeling at this moment? You have done everything that you know to do to prove that you are with Jesus. And now it seems like no matter what you do, you can't get it right, and that Jesus doesn't really necessarily seem to be with you. Where is his support in my life? And so here's Peter. He's no longer gung-ho to fight. He's no longer fired up. He's no longer taking the lead. In fact, what we see is Peter's doing something completely different. Where is Peter at this moment? He's following from a distance. He's following from a distance. Now, Matthew and Mark, they tell us that all the disciples fled. And it could have been that they fled from fear. That is certainly one option. But that word also means that they sought to escape danger. And one can see that there is danger and also not be afraid of that danger. They just know that they don't want to be a part of that danger. Whatever the reason is, though, that Peter just basically, after being rebuffed, being reproven by his own Messiah, the one whom he has called Christ, the Son of the living God, Peter goes away and then begins to follow from a distance. He's still following, just not as close. He didn't necessarily know what to do with everything that has just happened. He's emotionally aching. He is hurting. He's reeling. He's confused. But remember his promise to Jesus, yes? I will go with you. I will go with you. If anything, Peter is a man of his word. He is going with him, just not as closely. He's at a distance because Jesus had reproved him for his active loyalty. He wasn't just talk, he was action as well, and it got him into trouble with his master. It got him into trouble with his rabbi. Again, put yourself in that situation. Imagine that you're there and you see you're at work and your boss is having an issue. He's having trouble. She's having trouble. And you know how to fix it. You've got an idea. And so you begin to work on that idea. You're beginning to fix the situation. You know exactly what to do. The boss walks in as you are fixing the situation, and not only does he tell you that you're doing it wrongly, but then he actually undoes all the work that you've just done. Remember, Jesus healed the very person that Peter had struck. He'd undone everything that Peter had tried. Your boss gets on to you, not just to the side. Chris, come on, man. That's not the way to do things. Let's work on this together. That's not what happened. You get dressed down in front of all of your coworkers. Does that feel good? Probably there's now all of a sudden a pit in your stomach, some shame, confusion, anger. You're trying to help and they don't even want to accept your help. And so here's Peter. He's following Jesus, doing what he has promised to do, but from a distance. Beloved, it's hard to stay close to Jesus when his words and his actions have hurt you. Oftentimes those words, those ways, those actions, they can wound us emotionally. We had our plans. We knew exactly how to handle this situation. We knew exactly what we would do and where we would do it, how we were going to do it. We had all of these plans, and then Jesus comes along and he rebuffs us for those plans that we have. And he leaves us hanging. He leaves us hanging out to dry. Like, does he even care? Does he even know? And we're left emotionally aching. We're left emotionally reeling. I mean, we still believe. We're not abandoning. We're still following, but just follow from a distance. Not as close as we once did. Not as close with him as we once were. We know it, he knows it, but really there's not really a whole lot going on in us that is trying to make a difference and trying to catch up and be close to him again. It's just not there. We don't have the gumption to let that happen. Maybe because we haven't dealt with the ache. Maybe we really haven't even been honest about it. We haven't been honest with him. We haven't been honest with ourselves. Certainly haven't been honest with others. Which this leads us into that second factor. So the first one is that I see Peter, he's emotionally aching, following from a distance, not nearly as close to Jesus as he once was. That's part of that perfect storm that's brewing. But there's a second part. Here's Peter, and he's entirely alone. Of course, when I say that he's entirely alone, I mean that there are no Christ followers around him. So we see this in verse 55. Let's go back to verse 55. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sat down among them. So keep in mind, those who are sitting around this fire are the very people who went out and arrested Jesus with some extras. And here's Peter, and he's all alone. No other Christ follower. John tells us that John followed also. He saw Peter. He went and bounced for him with one of the servant girls, and then he disappears. John disappears. We don't know where he is. He seems to be spying on what's going on with Jesus. He's not anywhere near Peter. Peter is basically left here, and he is alone. And when we think about Peter, usually when we see Peter in the gospel accounts, he is followed by two other names. Peter is usually not there all by himself. Usually when we see Peter, he is with whom? There's other two people. Who are they? James and John. John's gone spying. Where is James? There's nobody there for Peter. We think about Jesus, of course, being abandoned by his disciples, but here is Peter also abandoned. He's got nobody there. I mean, where is this other elder brother, right? Where's this elder brother of the sons of thunder who was all ready to bring fire down upon the Samaritans for them just saying bad things about Jesus, let alone arresting Jesus? Where is this guy? And here's Peter. He's the oldest of the disciples. The oldest of the disciples there, John the youngest, he's spying somewhere. He's the oldest. He's the guy that Jesus has called the rock. Where are the people who he needs when that rock begins to waver? When it becomes unsteady? When it feels like it's about to crumble? Where are those people? They're nowhere around. He's entirely alone. There's no support, no one to steady him, no one there to assure him. Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes, 2 are better than one because they have a good reward for their toil. For they fall, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, two will withstand him. A threefold cord is not quickly broken. Church family, listen. How is it that somebody can be alone and stay warm? The temptation is all too great to do anything that they have to stay alone, to stay warm, including going into enemy territory, surrounding yourselves by those who are hostile to you so that you can get close to a fire so that you at least can feel like you're someone. And that's what Peter did. He joins those who are hostile to him, hostile to Jesus, to stay warm. As Christians, we don't do well at sticking close together. We don't stay close to one another, do we? There's been so much pushback against pursuing our emotions that allows them to lead, that we have forgotten the need to prod and to probe those emotions to see what's going on. And whether they're our own emotions or somebody else's. We feel something painful. And we pretend that it doesn't exist, lest we end up allowing it to lead. We see others in pain and we ignore them or tell them that they just simply need to cheer up, put on a happy face, when what we actually need, what they need, is for someone just to sit next to them and keep them warm so they can eventually be able to stand up and fight against the enemy. And we know that Satan is prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. We know how lions work, right? They go after the lone ranger, the lone animal, the one that lags behind, the one that follows from a distance. I saw a video yesterday, actually, of a lion. And he was all alone, and he was prowling, and it was one of these like kind of National Geographic kind of, right, videos. I don't know if that's what it was, but it was something like that. And they're showing him, and he's prowling along all alone. And there's this herd of zebras out there drinking in a river. And out of nowhere, then, of course, the lion pounces. He runs as fast as he can. The zebras take off. And he ends up catching that last zebra as always, right? Because it's the one that lags behind. And he catches this zebra, and he bears down on it. They're in the water, and the zebra, he's got him by the shoulder, and the zebra's there struggling as much as he can. And all these other zebras have stopped running, and they turn around. It pans out, and they show the zebras. They turn around and watch this other zebra, part of their herd, struggling to get free from this lion. But they do nothing except watch. And guess what? That zebra finally was able to kick the lion in the stomach and run off, bloodied, bruised, and exhausted. But 9 times out of 10, that doesn't happen. That zebra's dead. And then the video switched. Same video, a herd, or a pack of lions. Pack of lions? Pride of lions. Ooh, there you go. Now I feel like Simba. All right, pride of lions. And they're going after some water buffalo. And of course, they're prowling along as well. And then they take off where the water buffalo, initially the water buffalo run out of the water. And then all of a sudden, one of them, the one that lags behind, right, gets surrounded by the lions. And out of nowhere, the entire herd of water buffalo, the whole entire, whatever you call them, of water buffalo, turns around and attacks the lions. And the lions flee. And the one buffalo has been saved. Brothers and sisters, we best have a buffalo mindset. But it is all too often we act more like zebras, watching the hurting, watching the bloodied, watching the bruised, and we do nothing to interfere. We do nothing to protect. We need that buffalo mindset. And that leads us into that third and final human factor that led Peter to deny Jesus. So the first, he is emotionally aching. Second, he is entirely alone. But thirdly, he is effectively attacked. So we go back and we read most of the rest of this. Let's go back to verse 56. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, "This man also was with him." But he denied, saying, "Woman, I do not know him." And a little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." But Peter said, "Man, I am not." And after an interval of about an hour, Still another insisted, saying, "Certainly this man also was with him, for he too is a Galilean." But Peter said, "Man, I do not know what you are talking about." And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. Here is Peter. He's among a hostile group. He is just outside that high priest's house. Those that are around him were from the arrest or are servants of those who are there. They're sitting around him and they're sitting at this fire. At best, they're indifferent to what's going on, but at worst, they are complicit in what is going on. And again, John is somewhere spying, and Peter's sitting here all alone in his pain. It's the perfect storm. That perfect storm has now come to pass, and the waters are getting choppy, and she's coming on strong. And within about an hour, hour and a half or so, Peter has found himself in a hostile environment and attacked from all sides. And the more that he denies, the further he goes. Because at first he says, "I don't know Jesus. I don't know him. I don't know him." But then it turns and he says, I'm not even a part of that group. I don't know Jesus. I don't know the disciples. I'm not a part of that group at all. And ultimately he says, "I don't even know what you're talking about. I'm not involved in this whatsoever." He goes from one part to denying Jesus to denying the whole thing, the whole shebang. Everything that was necessary in order to bring him down has brought him down. It didn't start with the accusations. It started before the attacks. It started with the reeling, with the emotionally aching part of him. I've said it once, I'll say it again, I'll say it a number of times. Every atheist that I have ever met that has converted from Christianity to atheism, it's always for an emotional reason. It is never purely logical. It's never pure reason. They will use reason to excuse their denial, but it starts with a broken heart. So unless they were raised to be an atheist, every denier of the faith that I have ever heard, that I've ever known, has a story to tell about an emotional ache. And there was nobody around to sit with them, to listen to them, and to lift them from that pain and that confusion. And that's all that's necessary sometimes. Suffering and seclusion. At that point, Satan's attacks can begin to have their fullest effect. And those attacks are half-truths. The way that Peter actually answers these could actually make a lot of logical sense if you stop and think about it. They're kind of true, right? Peter here has pledged his loyalty to Jesus. He's proven his loyalty to Jesus. Jesus responds by reproving Peter. So maybe he didn't know Jesus like he thought he did. I thought I knew him, but I really don't know him. I don't know who this guy is at all. He's not the guy I thought he was. I thought he would have been proud of me. I thought he would have loved me more for standing so close to him. I thought he would have stood by me in that moment. And the disciples, I'm not with them. You see any around me? I'm the only one here. They're not with me. I'm not with them. I don't know who they are. I'm not a part of that group. And I certainly don't know what in the world's going on right now. I have no idea what you're talking about. My entire world has been flipped upside down. Everything that I thought true, everything that I thought right, everything that I thought good has been flipped. And I have no idea what is going on right now. I don't know. So no, I don't know him. And I'm not part of them. And I don't know what you're talking about. Brothers and sisters, when we're hurting, and when we're alone, when we're suffering and secluded, we are vulnerable to the attacks of Satan. And they come at us from all around this hostile world. And they prey on our insecurities that we're feeling at that very moment. How things might have been different if Peter had intentionally intrusive, Christ-centered, grace-driven, redemptive relationships. Again, that's Paul Tripp, that's not me. But I wonder. And you could say, but Chris, Peter kind of put himself into that situation. He went there. He's the one that surrounded himself with all those people. He put himself there. And my answer would be then, so what? Do we not leave the 99 to go after the one? Do we not snatch the one out of the fire? All of us at some point have put ourselves into situations that we ought not have been in. That doesn't mean we leave them alone. It's not that we don't want to be left alone. We want help in getting out of that situation. We ought to then go and help in those situations. Because otherwise, he put himself in that situation. Sounds a lot more like what the religious leaders were saying to Jesus when he hung on the cross. If he is the Christ, let him get down on his own. He saved others, let him save himself. You who would destroy the temple, save yourself now. Saying that, feeling that, thinking that, well, he put himself into that situation. That comes from a hardened, self-righteous heart. And I will confess, it is a heart that I too often, experience. But James says, my brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. So as we finish this passage, we've seen how Peter was emotionally aching, as he was going on the defense, and then he's rebuked by his own master. He was entirely alone, nobody there, no Christ follower with him to hold him, to sit near him, to assure him. And he was effectively attacked by those who were hostile to Jesus and his movement. No wonder he denied him. No wonder he fell as he did. He did it just as predicted. And when that rooster crowed, it's like he came to. He realized what he had done. And he looks up to where, in the direction where Jesus was, and at that moment locks eyes with the man he just denied 3 times. What would you experience? Luke tells us what he experienced. He went out and wept bitterly. But that's not the end of the story. Jesus suffered from that denial. He certainly did. He suffered from that denial. But that suffering was planned, it was accepted, it was embraced, as was the beatings, the betrayal, the crucifixion, the death, the forsaking from God, as well as his resurrection and the power that comes with that, and the restoration that would come to Peter. Because there one day, Jesus was walking along the beach, Peter and the disciples out there at sea doing their fishing. And when Peter finally realized, when he hears, that's the Lord, Peter dives into the water, swims to shore, gets there just before everybody else. But there, when he gets to shore, he sees Jesus has built a fire. The way that John describes this, he describes it in the same way that he described the fire at the residence of the high priest. He's linking the two. And there he is, and they have now, he is there, and he's there next to Jesus. He refuses to follow from a distance anymore. He wants to be as close, and so he swims as fast as he can to get to him. There is the fire. A little bit later, he is now surrounded by another 5 of the disciples. He is no longer alone, and he is no longer following from a distance, but there is still this ache. And as we read in John, that Peter, he is being questioned by Jesus, but Jesus isn't doing it to hurt him. He is doing it to heal him. To heal the wound, to heal the ache. And he does it in front of everybody. That they would all know that Peter is restored. Now maybe you're here this morning, and maybe you're surrounded by people that you feel at one point have abandoned you. Or maybe they just simply remind you of people who have abandoned you. And you don't know what to do with that. Peter, 5 more disciples around him. The people that were not with him when he needed them most. What do you do with that? Let me encourage you with this. Pray for them. Can you pray? You may be angry. You may be hurt. You don't know what to do with all these emotions that you're feeling. I would say absolutely pray. Pray for them. Pray for yourself that you could forgive them. Pray that God would give them a spirit of courage for next time. And pray that God would give them eyes to see the next time that they have a brother or sister in need. That they would learn from your heartache, from your pain. Here's Peter, surrounded by brothers who had deserted him, sitting by the Savior that he had denied. And Jesus heals him of that pain. He puts his thumb right on it, though. And it hurts so much at first. But he becomes healed. John says, when they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. And notice, in each of these, he doesn't call him Peter. He doesn't call him the rock yet. He's gone back to his given name. Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than the other 5 here? He said to them, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. He said, feed my lambs. He said to the second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He said, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. He said, tend my sheep. He said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And I just find it interesting, John goes back and calls him Peter. though Jesus was not yet doing that. Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my sheep." And in that moment, it is as if Peter realizes what Jesus is saying there. Peter's heart is healed. He realizes that Jesus isn't doing this to hurt him. He is doing it to heal him, and that he is not displacing him. He is not bringing him into destitution. He is no longer feeling useless. He is no longer feeling like he is pointless among Jesus. Jesus says, "I still have work for you. Your mission, your job hasn't changed. You're not useless, Peter." Brothers and sisters, we need to stay close to Jesus. We may feel like we've gotten so far and we're following from such a distance that there is no way that we're useful or have any point in even following him anymore. But what Jesus has done for Peter, he will do for us. May we have the mindset of a buffalo to protect our herd from the evil one. And may we love and encourage as Jesus begins to restore the one who is brokenhearted, the one who has followed from a distance maybe for so long, the one who seems to be just stuck. That's what we need to do. That needs to be our prayer. And so let us pray.